The smell hit Jian first, not the sterile recycled air smell of the Cheonan 9 that she'd grown used to over 14 months. This was something else entirely. Damp stone and something vaguely metallic, like old pennies left in rain. She was running a diagnostic on Bay 3's life support manifold when the proximity alert went off, and she knocked her elbow hard against the conduit panel trying to stand up too fast. She hissed, grabbed her arm, and limped to the observation deck with her tablet still in one hand and a half-eaten nutrition bar in the other. The ship on the scanner was unlike anything in any database she'd ever loaded. It wasn't large, exactly. That was the first surprise. Most of the xenobiology community had spent the better part of the 2090s theorizing that any civilization capable of interstellar travel would announce itself with something massive and terrifying. This vessel was narrow, almost needle-shaped, and it rotated slowly on its own axis like it was thinking. Its hull was a deep, wet green, the color of moss after a storm, and it gave off no thermal signature that the Cheonan 9 sensors recognized. Just that rotation, just that patience. She ate the rest of the nutrition bar without tasting it. The Cheonan 9 was a deep survey vessel, crew of 11. It was not a first contact ship. There was no protocol for this in her personal handbook, and Commander Bok Soon-woo was 3 hours away on a surface excursion to Kepler 442's third moon with 6 of the crew and all 4 of the good environment suits. The remaining 4 people aboard included Jian, who was the ship's atmospheric systems engineer, old Dr. Huang, who studied ice core samples and who had once famously fallen asleep during a meteor shower, Ensign Ryu, who was 23 and terrified of everything, and Navigator Che, who was currently in the medical bay with a broken collarbone from the bad landing 2 weeks ago. Jian pressed the intercom button. "Dr. Huang, I need you on the observation deck." A long pause. "I'm in the middle of something. There's a spaceship rotating next to us." Another pause. Longer. "I'll be right up." The aliens made contact 40 minutes later. Not through radio, not through light signals, through what the Cheonan 9's communication system registered as a direct neural adjacent frequency, meaning it didn't come in through the receivers at all. It came in through the ship's biological interface panels, the ones designed for medically monitored crew operations. The entire panel lit up amber and then produced, in rough but recognizable Korean, a single sentence. "We know you are not the representatives. Bring us to your world's knowledge keepers." Dr. Huang read it 3 times. Then he took off his glasses and cleaned them very carefully with his shirt, which was a thing he did when he was buying time to think. "Well," he said finally. "Well," agreed Jian. Ensign Ryu made a small sound behind them both. They sent the message to Commander Bok, who received it on the surface and responded in approximately 40 seconds with a message that contained several words Jian hadn't heard him use before. Then he said to stall. Then he said he'd be back in 90 minutes. Then he said, and she could hear him already running back toward the landers, "Do not open any doors." Jian looked at the panel. She thought about what Dr. Huang had told her once, unprompted, while they were both doing equipment maintenance. The tragedy of every first contact story is that the side with the least power waits too long to speak. She hadn't thought much about it at the time. She thought about it now. She typed back, "We hear you. Please give us time." The ship continued rotating. Commander Bok returned in 87 minutes, which was genuinely impressive given the distance, and he came aboard still smelling like the moon's sulfur-rich atmosphere, a smell that clung to suits and hair for hours no matter how well you scrubbed. He reviewed everything while drinking cold coffee and not sitting down, and then he did what any experienced survey commander does when facing something entirely outside his training. He called Earth. Earth, at that distance, had a 14-minute communication lag each way. So they waited. In the meantime, the alien vessel sent 2 more messages. The first was a list of what they called Fal Vedris, which the translation matrix rendered, haltingly, as things held back, or possibly closed rooms. And it became clear fairly quickly that they weren't asking for military secrets or navigation charts or anything that simple. They wanted to know what humans considered too dangerous to share. Not what humanity knew, what humanity had decided to hide. The second message was harder to process. "We have traveled 11 years to ask this. We will not wait longer than one of your rotations. 1 Earth day." That was what they had. Commander Bach set down his coffee cup very precisely on the console edge. Thoughts? Jian thought. They traveled 11 years. She thought about what that meant. What it cost to spend 11 years moving toward a species you've only observed from a distance, not knowing if they'd be hostile, not knowing if the trip would even be worth it. Something about that kind of commitment made her want to sit down somewhere quiet. Dr. Huang cleared his throat. I think what they're asking for is trust. That's a very optimistic interpretation, said Commander Bach. It's the accurate one. They're not asking what we know. They're asking what we've decided others shouldn't know. That's asking us to be honest about our own judgment, about our own fear. He put his glasses back on. It's actually a rather sophisticated probe. Earth's response came back, as expected, to say wait for official channels and do not engage independently and please confirm crew safety at all times. Commander Bach read it once. Then he looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, Jian, what do you think? She was startled. He didn't usually ask her. She was atmospheric systems. She kept the air breathable and the temperatures stable. She was not, technically, a diplomat or a xenobiologist or anyone with relevant credentials for this situation. But she'd been thinking since that first Amber panel message, and she had a specific thought that kept coming back. I think, she said slowly, we open one door. Everyone looked at her. They asked what we keep closed, so we show them one thing we keep closed. Not everything, just one room. And we see what they do with it. Commander Bach was quiet for about 10 seconds. Dr. Huang was nodding with the slow enthusiasm of someone who has spent his whole career waiting for a moment that would matter. Ryu looked like he might be sick, but he was young, and Jian remembered being 23 and deciding that fear was not actually a good reason to stop. Commander Bach said, What room? They sent the history of the Yoido Accord debates. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of thing that showed up in public archives. It was 72 hours of internal United Nations negotiation recordings from 2067, made available to Jian only because her clearance had been upgraded for the Deep Survey mission. The Yoido Accords were the agreements that had quietly shelved 3 specific biotechnologies, cellular replication techniques that could theoretically have ended aging, but that the Scientific Council had determined were too destabilizing, too asymmetric in access, too easy to weaponize. The recording showed the arguments, the shouting, the crying, the scientists who had pushed for release and been voted down, the politicians who had been relieved. The moment when Dr. So Mirei, lead researcher, had put her head in her hands and said, We're making the right choice, and I hate it. It wasn't a secret weapon. It wasn't a map to Earth. It was just humans showing another civilization what it looks like when humanity chooses to hold something back, and why, and how much it costs. The transmission took 40 minutes to send. Then they waited again. The alien vessel stopped rotating. That was the first sign that something had changed. It just held still. In the 6 hours since it had appeared, it had not once stopped rotating, and Jian had gotten so used to the slow rhythm of it that the stillness felt loud. She kept looking up at the observation window even when she was trying to focus on other things. The ache in her elbow from the conduit panel had settled into a dull throb. She pressed her fingers against it absently. The panel lit amber again. This time the message was longer. We have a term, Velthorin. It means the grief of the right decision. We did not know humans had this. We have traveled 11 years because we thought you did not. Jian read it 3 times. She felt something move through her chest that she didn't have an immediate word for. Commander Bach was already composing a response. Dr. Huang had sat down and was writing rapidly in his personal log. Ryu, to his credit, had stopped looking terrified and was now looking at the panel with something closer to wonder. The alien vessel sent a second message, almost immediately after. We would like to speak with the one who chose what to show us. Her name, apparently, was very difficult to render in whatever phonetic system the alien communication matrix was working with, so the messages that followed referred to her simply as the door opener, which Jian found mortifying in a way she couldn't fully explain. Commander Bach found it hilarious, which was unhelpful. The individual who had been sending messages identified itself. After considerable back and forth through the translation matrix, during which they established that the word itself was both accurate and insufficient, as Sarath of the Vel Yun, a researcher and what translated approximately as contact speaker, which seemed to be a role something like a diplomat but more personal. Sarath had studied human transmissions for 9 of the 11 years of travel. Sarath was, by their own account, something of an obsessive. The messages became more frequent, more specific. Sarath wanted to know about the Accord debates in detail, not the outcome but the process. Why did humans argue loudly? What did it mean when someone said, "I hate this," about a decision they were defending? Was grief a form of commitment? Ji-yeon found herself answering before Commander Bok could draft official responses, which he did notice but decided not to address directly. She typed quickly and without diplomatic polish, and she answered honestly, which was maybe not protocol but felt right. She said, "Grief means it costs something. If it doesn't cost anything, you're not really choosing." The reply came back in under 3 minutes. "We have been talking about this for 11 years. No one has said it that way." She stared at her screen. She was aware, somewhere at the back of her mind, that this was not standard survey crew behavior. She was also aware that she didn't particularly care. It was Dr. Huang who suggested, on the second day, that they ask Sarath about Velthoron. What they learned was careful and slow in the learning, because the translation matrix kept finding gaps, places where concepts didn't cross, where you could sense the shape of a meaning but not quite grab it. The Vel Yun, Sarath species, whose name translated approximately as the deep-going ones, though Sarath said that was a simplification, did not share technology the way humans did. They shared decisions. They considered it a form of intimacy, showing another civilization not just what you had built, but what you had decided not to build, and why, and what that cost. They had been watching humanity for decades. They had seen the wars and the waste and the genuine horror of human history, and they had almost not come. But then they had seen the Yoedo Accords, not the official announcement, but a leaked recording of the argument, and something had shifted. Because humanity had not just made a difficult choice, humanity had documented the difficulty, had kept the grief on the record. That, apparently, was unusual. Ji-yeon thought about Dr. So Mide putting her head in her hands. She thought about how easy it would have been for someone to cut that moment from the footage, and how nobody had. She said to Commander Bok, quietly, at the end of that second day, "I think they thought we were something worse." "We are something worse," he said, which was fair. But apparently, not entirely. On the third day, Sarath asked if they could transmit an image. It was the first direct visual exchange. What came through was not a photograph in any conventional sense. It was something more like a diagram of feeling. The Velian processed visual information differently, and their images carried what the translation matrix flagged as embedded contextual weight, meaning when you looked at it, there was information you didn't consciously read, but somehow absorbed. It took Ji-yeon a moment to understand what she was seeing. It was a room, small, sparse, something that might have been a desk, and on the surface of the desk, a collection of objects that the matrix tagged as kept items, things held not for function, but for meaning. One of them the matrix identified, after a long processing pause, as a fragment of a communication device. Old. Probably decades old. The label was automatic, first contact rehearsal object. Sarath had been practicing, for years, had kept the practice material. Ji-yeon sat with that for a long time. She asked, carefully, "Is this room a door?" The response came, "Yes. I did not expect to open it today." She understood, in a way she hadn't expected to, that this was not a political exchange anymore. Maybe it hadn't been for a while. They spent 2 more days in extended communication before the official Earth delegation arrived. A proper first contact team on a faster diplomatic vessel, with credentials and protocols and an actual xenolinguistics division. They were efficient and professional, and somewhat baffled by the depth of rapport that the Cheonan 9 crew had already established. Commander Bok handled the briefing. Dr. Huang gave the diplomatic team most of his personal log notes, which they received with a slightly glazed expression of people encountering more context than they'd prepared for. Ryu had, somewhere in the past 4 days, apparently decided to pursue xenocommunications as his secondary specialty, and submitted the relevant paperwork while the delegation was still boarding. Jian was finishing a full diagnostic of the Bay 3 manifold, finally, because the past week had made it somewhat difficult to complete, when the amber panel lit up one more time. The official speakers have arrived. I understand you will no longer be the primary contact. She looked at the panel for a moment. She typed, "That's right, they're more qualified." A pause. Then, "I did not say I preferred qualified." She laughed. Actually laughed, short and surprised, alone in Bay 3 with the smell of metal and recycled air around her, and the panel glowing soft amber in the dimness. She typed, "I'll ask Commander Bach if there's a way to continue the non-official exchange. I don't know if there is." The response was almost immediate. "The Velyun have a term for this too." Sarath speaking, "What I do outside official channels. I have been told it is not a formal role." "Neither is door opener," she typed back. "No, but some things are named after they happen." Commander Bach did, in fact, find a way. It took some negotiation with the diplomatic team, who were initially reluctant to allow unsanctioned crew to alien communication, but Dr. Huang made a surprisingly persuasive argument involving the entire documented history of first contact theory and its near-universal conclusion that the most valuable exchanges happened in the margins of official contact. The team lead, a sharp-faced woman named Director Park, who had clearly dealt with Dr. Huang's type before, approved a limited parallel channel with a logging requirement and a 24-hour review period. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. The collarbone in medical bay healed. The sulfur smell faded from Commander Bach's good coat. Ryu started keeping his own communication log and showing it, nervously, to anyone who would read it. The Chonan 9 stayed in orbit while negotiations continued, because it turned out that having the original contact crew nearby was considered valuable by both sides, which nobody had predicted. Jian learned, slowly, through the logged and reviewed channel, that Velthoron had a secondary meaning she hadn't fully understood at first. It wasn't just grief of the right decision. It was also the understanding that comes from having made that decision, that a choice which costs you something teaches you more than a choice that costs nothing, that a civilization which can feel Velthoron is a civilization that can be trusted, at least a little, with its own power. She asked Sarath once, "Did you already trust us when you sent the first message?" The reply took longer than usual. She imagined, and she knew it was imagination, knew she had no real picture of what Sarath looked like, or moved like, or thought through. She imagined something like someone sitting with an honest question. "No," Sarath said finally. "I hoped you were trustworthy. I came 11 years to find out. These are different things." Jian thought about that for a long time. She thought about a diagnostic she'd put off for a week while something larger was happening. She thought about Dr. So Mireille and a head bowed in her hands in a recording nobody had deleted. She thought about a room with kept objects and a piece of an old communication device. "Yes," she typed back. "They are." Outside, through the observation window, the Velian vessel held steady in the dark, not rotating, just present. Waiting, perhaps, for the next door someone might find the nerve to open. Not because they'd been asked, and not because it was easy, but because some things are only named after they happen, and some distances only close when someone decides the cost is worth paying. The amber panel glowed. She pressed her palm briefly against its warm surface. Then she went back to Bay 3, finished the diagnostic, and filed her maintenance report. Because someone had to keep the air breathable. Because the small work, and the enormous work, it turned out, had always been the same work. The panel stayed warm behind her for a long time after she left.